doctors and journalists. Together, in December 1971, they created Médecins Sans Frontières. The initiative came from the medical journal Tonus, with the aim of creating a medical strike force capable of responding to an emergency anywhere in the world. With this front page story, the journal proclaimed the birth of an original alliance between the media and humanitarian action. It was also the beginning of what was to become known as the Without Borders movement. Regardless of geopolitical boundaries, the goal was to be able to go wherever needed to provide care and treatment and to speak out against suffering. From the moment it was created, MSF found itself faced with a series of humanitarian crises. From Cambodian refugees in Thailand to famine in Ethiopia, to war in the former Yugoslavia, to genocide in Rwanda. These were crises that shaped and strengthened the association's character. Fierce independence of spirit, decisions taken independent of any financial or media pressure. This independence comprises 4 aspects: impartiality, speaking out, financial independence, and independent medical practices. (1994). Following the Rwandan genocide, the Hutus were fearful of reprisals and fled the country. Aid groups were working in the camps in Tanzania and the former Zaire, where refugees were massed in their thousands. However, it soon became clear that the former perpetrators of the genocide were terrorizing the camps and diverting international aid. At the end of '94, once the emergency phase was over, MSF France decided to put an end to its intervention. However, in so doing, it had to make the difficult choice to stop assisting a population in dire need of assistance. There is still no hard and fast rule on the boundary between impartiality and effectiveness. It's negotiated on a case-by-case basis. In 2009, the Sri Lankan government launched a large-scale offensive against the Tamil rebels. Tens of thousands of victims fled the fighting and crowded into government camps. The presence of humanitarian aid was controlled by the Sri Lankan state. The situation was controversial and sparked strong debate within MSF. Assistance to the population in danger was the priority, and MSF ended up accepting the government's political conditions.
Independence, or the claim of independence, is nothing more than a means to an end. This end is to provide medical services, to care for people according to the priority of their needs, depending on the situation in which they find themselves. Independence can be summarized as our ability to either say yes or no. Saying yes means engaging in action according to the services we can provide and the idea that we have our role, rather than giving into pressure from a donor, public opinion, or whatever. When we think about the tsunami in 2004 or certain natural disasters, it's clear that public opinion can be extremely powerful and distort, or in any case, alter one's judgment. So we can say yes to action, or indeed no. In other words, not to go there or to withdraw. Typical cases were Rwanda or Sri Lanka, where, despite everything, we took a relatively independent decision to carry on. No one forced us to continue, just as no one forced us to leave Rwanda.
Political independence combined with speaking out. 1985. Famine was decimating the population of northern Ethiopia.
Il y a déjà 3 ans que les organisations humanitaires tentent d'alerter l'opinion publique sur l'imminence de la catastrophe, sans succès.
The whole world was watching the country in the Horn of Africa, and enormous funds were collected by aid organizations. This was the birth of a charity business which wields immense media power. The intentions were good, but in the field, humanitarian aid was being diverted. The government was organizing population displacement on a vast scale. A program referred to as villagization was in reality forced displacement and led to tens of thousands of deaths. For humanitarian organizations, the dilemma was a simple one: keep quiet, stay and try to control the damage, or denounce and run the risk of being forced to leave the country. MSF was the only one to speak out and was expelled in December 1985. The other organizations publicly, or through their silence, distanced themselves from these accusations. In 1999, MSF once again lived up to its outspoken reputation. The association was to receive the Nobel Peace Prize.
The 1999 Nobel Peace Prize is awarded to Médecins Sans Frontières.
It chose the ceremony in Oslo as the moment to make a declaration that was anything but conciliatory.
The people of Chechnya, and particularly the people of Grozny, today and for more than 3 months, have endured indiscriminate bombing by the Russian army. For them, humanitarian assistance is virtually unknown. It is the sick, the old, and the infirm who cannot escape Grozny. I appeal here today to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Russia, and through him to President Yeltsin, to stop the bombing of defenseless civilians in Chechnya.
It's true that for MSF it's important to communicate and describe what is happening to the populations we're assisting. In certain relatively exceptional situations, we've had to adopt a conflictual position. In each situation, we weigh up the pros and cons. After all, we are a humanitarian organization, a medical organization, an organization of action. Our first and foremost objective is to provide assistance to people in need. Every time we speak out, we weigh up the arguments to determine what will be the most helpful, the most important way to proceed with regard to the situation of the people we are trying to assist.
The early 1980s, MSF was growing increasingly popular.
Ça ne va pas? Vous voulez que j'appelle un médecin?
Non, merci. Je suis médecin. Médecins sans frontières. Accompagnez-les au moins jusqu'à la frontière.
However, there was a problem. It remained overly dependent on isolated donations closely related to media coverage of humanitarian crises. Over the years, the association managed to obtain the confidence of regular donors. They, today, account for more than 70% of the association's donations.
Pour certains, la vie a un prix. Avec 1 franc par jour, Médecins sans frontières assure la santé d'une famille en détresse.
Financial independence also means being able to say thank you, but no, when donations are no longer needed. This is what happened in late 2004. An unprecedented surge of generosity followed the tsunami which destroyed vast tracts of the Southeast Asian coast. After an on-site assessment, MSF stated that it did not need the 111 million euros promised by donors. This declaration was condemned by other aid organizations. MSF indeed spent only 24.5 million euros in Indonesia and Sri Lanka. After requesting donors' permission, the remaining funds were reallocated to other operations. 2010, a large part of Pakistan was devastated by flooding. 1,500 people lost their lives, and about 20 million people were affected by the disaster.
There are massive non-food requirements because the water is sometimes reaching up to the first floor of their homes, and as it recedes, it takes away everything in the house.
This was a humanitarian disaster closely linked to political issues. Some areas of the country refused American aid, or aid linked to American funding. Thanks to its financial independence, MSF obtained access to certain regions from which other organizations were banned.
Financial independence is based on 2 aspects. First is the donors, who demonstrate their trust through monthly donations. which means that we have a certain amount of funding available, enabling us to deal with emergencies, regardless of the media attention. The second is the small share of our overall financing that comes from government or UN funding sources. Our financial independence enables us to intervene in situations, primarily conflict situations, while demonstrating that we have absolutely no ties to any government whatsoever.
Finally, independence means creating one's own tools adapted to the needs of our teams in the field. This is a practice that Médecins Sans Frontières developed on the basis of its work in the Cambodian refugee camps in Thailand in the 70s.
Il s'agit de les empêcher de succomber dans la minute ou dans l'heure qui suit par des gestes élémentaires de réanimation.
Medical aid was disorganized and working conditions unsuited to the setting and the climate. This saw the arrival of the emergency kits. The best known are the surgery kit and the cholera kit. These two kits evolved in line with technological changes and the organization's needs. They were the templates that inspired many other aid groups and are still in use today. Since the Cambodian refugee camps, however, the world has changed and the teams are faced with new challenges, no longer just logistical ones. HIV/AIDS, malaria, meningitis, tuberculosis. The doctors can no longer sit back and watch their patients being neglected by pharmaceutical research.
Our patients are dying, not because their diseases are incurable, but because as consumers...
In 1999, MSF launched a campaign for access to essential medicines. Its role was political lobbying and mobilization of the media. One of the campaign's objectives was to revitalize research into neglected diseases. MSF thus took part in the creation in 2003 of DNDI, the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative.
The campaign for access to essential medicines enabled MSF to create a healthy relationship with the pharmaceutical firms. In other words, to maintain the correct distance. We criticize them, we criticize what doesn't work. We also criticize the rules, we criticize the prices, which are really too high. We criticize the fact that the firms don't carry out enough research, and we want to see them being more flexible with regard to intellectual property rights. So we can't be accused of making concessions in this area. At the same time, we launched the DNDI. At certain phases in the drug development process, the DNDI in practice needs the pharmaceutical firms, because that's their core business, to develop and produce drugs. So there isn't really any contradiction. We simply keep the firms doing what they know best, which is to develop drugs. However, we're very firm on the conditions in which this happens, precisely to maintain this independence. Très ferme sur les conditions dans lesquelles ça se fait, justement pour garder cette indépendance.
Thanks to DNDI, ASAC, a new drug combination to treat malaria, came onto the scene in 2008. This was a revolution. Cheaper, easier to use, less risk of resistance, and patent-free. At last, an innovation tailored to the needs of the patients. In 2010, Médecins Sans Frontières treated 7 million patients. MSF today employs 30,000 people working in 70 countries. Thanks to its nearly 4 million donors, it has a budget of 615 million euros. And tomorrow, the MSF adventure continues.